So as you can see, we have an old friend back, and not old by age, old by, I think this is Tyler, your third or fourth time
I
with
think
us.
so.
We introduced him a while back as Tidy Dad. That's his Instagram. He has a big surprise to talk to us about. But also, we were recording the previously to you coming on here. And we were talking because in the mix of everything, in the mix of the year, in the mix of, I think we've talked about me moving from Wisconsin and having to declutter and the whole thing. And we moved to Florida. Well, I ended up having to move yet again in Florida from one location to another. So we were talking, the girls had asked me if I had done much decluttering
Yeah.
and, because I decluttered so much. And here was the surprising thing. I did. And it was like, so we got into this whole discussion about decluttering. And I felt this time it was even more intentional, like more, um, I wasn't as overwhelmed. It was easier to release things. And it was, um, like therapeutic.
Hmm?
And I'm like, okay, I have to ask Tyler, how often do
Yeah.
you declutter? And is this something you and your family does on a yearly, quarterly,
Yeah.
whenever you feel like it? Like,
Yeah.
let's
No,
go.
it's such a good question, but I also feel like, the first time you do it, you don't have the muscles. That it's like when you start to do it or see it as sort of this like yearly practice, or that's something that is just part of your normal sort of like rhythm to life, it becomes that much easier. And I would also say, like in your case, there's nothing like moving from one place, Wisconsin, all the way down to Florida, where you had to take everything, you know, hours and hours. Like that's a huge move. And then to get down and get settled and then realize, okay, we need to move again. I feel like just you physically feel the burden of stuff because you see it in the hours spent packing boxes and physically moving it and then unpacking it. So in some ways, I don't know, that's sort of that move is sort of like a beautiful metaphor for what, you're learning about decluttering, but building those muscles. But yeah, I mean, for us, as you all know, we're in a 750 square foot apartment. I have three daughters. They're now 9, 7, and 4. And
Wow.
so decluttering is just a normal part of our day-to-day life because there's no place to put anything. That it's like even as we've just gone through the holidays, anything that we bring in, there has to be a place for it to go. Like I can't just discover these new rooms or areas of our apartment. And so in that respect, it has been cool to guide the girls through, the process of decluttering, that they sort of understand when things have sort of hit sort of their boundary and they're like, it's time to go through books. It's time to go through baby dolls. Like it's time to go through this stuff. We're not playing with this stuff anymore. And so that's been cool to see that they sort of understand that this is just life. This is something that happens. Like decluttering is a normal part of life.
I think what I also found this move was there were things that I definitely wanted to take that even were more intentional. So we talk about, I have this older vase, it's on the floor right beside me. It's from the 1940s. It was my grandmother's. And it means nothing to anybody but me.
Yeah.
And it's made this move. And yes, it made the move from one house in Florida to this house because for me, there's a comfort in when I look at it. And yet there were other things that I didn't even really like. I unpacked all the boxes, but when I went to repack, I'm like, I didn't even use any of this stuff. So we're going through it right now. I'm not repacking it again. And then there was another thing that I'm like, but this frame picture is important, but I don't like the frame. So I took the frame out and got rid of that. And I have the picture and it's set aside. And when I find the right frame, then that's what it is. So it was like a different, totally declutter.
Yeah, which I think is cool because what it's clear is that you had the clear sort of like parameters or even the definition of what it is that you wanted to keep or like the why behind it. And even that like vase, it reminds me of this like lamp that I have. It's right beside me in our bedroom, that it was a similar thing. Like I was there at the like flea market when my grandma purchased it. I remember her dickering back and forth with the person because she was like, you always get 10%. And the person was not giving her the 10%. So I was with my grandma. She like walked away 2 times because she really wanted it. And like this lamp, you know, it's funny. It's like yellow with these like goats on it and this like tree and like it's a
Yeah.
strange lamp. But yet, when I see it and it's on my nightstand, which is my personal sort of real estate, but when I see it, I think of her. And that's always like when I find myself sort of struggling with, do I want to keep something? Am I ready to move it out? I sort of use that like litmus test of the lamp with my grandma, like it's something that brings so much joy to me.
And I even said that to the girls in our recording. I'm like, my children will probably, it'll probably just either be donated or whatever. And I'm okay with that at
Yeah.
the end of whatever. I'm okay with that. It brings me joy, and that's why I keep it.
Yeah.
It brings you joy. That's why you keep it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that it's when why be surrounded with all of the excess when you can be surrounded with the things that really do, as Marie Kondo says, like brings joy.
Hmm.
Like I think that that's really important.
Yes. Do you want to
Well, I
tell
just
us
went through
about
a
you? Oh,
situation where I had a family member who's downsized and because she's now going into independent living and watching how much stuff, and there's no one to give it to. No one wants it. She had 3 vacuums. She had just accumulation of stuff. And it was
Yeah.
really trying to get her to detach herself from that whole emotional connection. It was a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah, and I think that it's when, a book that you may be familiar with. Um, Hold on a sec. Is it okay if I close the door? As you can probably hear my
yeah.
own children, and then I have a book for you.
Okay.
Sorry. Nothing like the live moments. But what
Oh,
you were
I
saying
had the same thing before. So.
It reminded me of the book, The Swedish Art of Death Cleaning. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was interesting because it explores this author who basically had to move out. She had to deal with one of her parents who was dying, and she was sort of confronted with, oh my gosh, they're gone. Now I have the burden of going through all of their stuff. But then presenting the alternative, I think that it was another family member who decided, as she was advancing in age, to start intentionally giving of her things to individual people and sort of giving that like why behind it. The idea being that she didn't want to become a burden to someone later in life. And I don't know if it's morbid or not, but I do sometimes think about that it's like, why are we accumulating all of these things? What is the purpose? It's not serving me in this current season. Like 2 months ago, I did this 30 items for 30 days capsule wardrobe
I
challenge.
remember that. I remember that.
And
Yes.
that was that was a fascinating experiment because I have a small closet. It's 14 inches wide, 6.5 feet tall, but I counted the number of items and I had over 100 clothing items. It's all sort of neatly organized. But I was like, is living with less for this month, is it going to free up? The experiment was like, is it going to make decision making easier? Is it going to free up time in the morning? Am I going to miss any of the items? And so I packed away everything that was not in my capsule and I put it underneath my bed so that I could not touch it. And I resolved, to not unzip it. And it was fascinating to see what I learned. And it reminds me of what you're talking about there because when you're clearing out as you're downsizing, you're confronted with that question of like, why did I hold on to all of this
Mhm.
for so long? And even the 3 vacuums,
Yeah.
often it's because so many people have the places to store the stuff. So
Yeah.
it's like out of sight, out of mind. which for some is an organizing philosophy. But, at some point, somebody has to deal with the stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
we all talked about it, how, hey, we need to be doing that now so that we're not leaving that for our kids. Because exactly
Yeah.
what you said, Michelle, too, is that they may not want the vase, but you do, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
interesting because, like, my sister, you know, she has a palatial farmhouse with lots of farm animals, but she has all these closets. And one day I opened one up because I always joke and act like, oh, is this the West Wing or is this the East Wing? Is this some hidden room? But she had all of these sheet sets, and she was like, I'm saving these for my daughters someday when they move into their first house. And I'm like, first of all, your daughters are the same age as mine. And second of all, like sheet sets aren't very expensive. And what if they want to choose the color sheets? What if they want to choose the like thread count? What if they like the t-shirt, sheets versus the like, you know, 200 count versus the fleece? Like, I think so often we hold on to things for that someday, which can be nice, but also it can feel like a burden. And we all have such individual preferences, which is why, even going back to that idea of decluttering, it's like why we have the decluttering calendar and we try to go through things in a cyclical sort of
Hmm.
nature, because when you declutter with a calendar, you can align what you're decluttering with the time of the year when other people might be looking for it, which I think is
Yep.
huge. That it's like, you know, the one example is like Halloween costumes. We always go through them in the month of October. We go through dress up clothes because everybody's looking for things, for random things to fit that, to put that Halloween costume together. But come November 1st, nobody wants you
Right.
know, costumes or dress up clothes. Like everybody's looking to get rid of it. Just like now in the new year, everybody wants to go through all their holiday stuff. And they're like, I'm just going to drop it off at the donation center. But nobody wants holiday. No, but no one
Mm-mm.
in January is like, let me go to the donation center to see if they have any really good, holiday decor. Everybody wants it out.
Yeah.
So that has helped to get it to the right people.
And when I was in Wisconsin, I volunteered at a hospice thrift store. And in January and February, if they got holiday decor, they didn't like put it away and save it to be able to bring it back out. They don't have the
Yeah.
storage for
Yeah.
it.
Mm.
So they then have to recycle it somehow. So and I listened to one of your stories the other day when you said that, and it was like, yep, so true. Like that's why you should, like when we talked and we started about this, like this how to do it. So um what we're starting the year in January, fresh, 2025. Tyler, give us some advice. How do we tidy up?
Yeah, so it's funny because going to the calendar, the things that are on my tidy up, my decluttering list for January. So one, it's important documents. So like tax prep. Like now is the time to go through in January those important bills and papers. And it's also recognizing that like you only need to keep tax documents for a certain number of years. So it's when like shredding and going through and getting yourself organized is really important. The second category of items is, I think, kitchen gadgets, that the majority of us did the most cooking that we're going to do for the year between like Thanksgiving through the new year, because that's when we're using all those specialty gadgets, when we're using those trays, when we're taking dishes to certain people's homes or hosting people. And so it's like, if you didn't use it, like, then why are you
Right,
keeping? And that's
right.
something, even those two categories, you can see how it can start to free up some of the thinking. So, like when tax season is starting to come around, you feel like you're ready and you're prepared, that your kitchen doesn't feel like it's overwhelmed. We're going into this like hibernation mode. But then February, that's when, spring is on the horizon and we like go through travel gear. We start to look at swimsuits and beach towels because those are types of things that people are looking for at that time of year as opposed to waiting for the middle of summer when everybody already has their stuff. So that's one of the things that I think it's really helpful is if you can think about your own space. Everybody's home is different, but you think about like what are those big categories that make sense to align with the month and the year. It can just help to simplify it. And then, all right, every January, we sort of do this again. And every year, as you were mentioning, like it should theoretically get a little bit easier.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And like
On that.
you're teaching your children that so that when they grow up, they're doing
Yeah.
the exact same thing.
Yeah, because it becomes sort of this normal cycle that like new things
Mhm.
come in and old things go out. And it's when like you know, clutter, it isn't just the physical clutter, it's also the mental and the emotional that like this is one of those times of year. It's like at the start of the year, there's all this like new year, new you energy, and people try to revamp every area of their life in this 1 month that really goes down to I think that there's like a quitting day. It might be like January 17th or something, or maybe even earlier. That's basically when the large majority of people have already like given up on their New Year's
Hmm.
resolution. And oftentimes it's because people try to take on too much at a time. And so I think that it's why, you know, when I talk about approaches or routines, it really is that idea of taking whatever may be overwhelming and break it up into smaller, more manageable parts, or else you just are left completely overwhelmed.
It was funny. We even talked about that. Tracy, you were talking about that. We were both talking about that in the episode that sometimes you walk into a room and be like, it's just too much, and you turn around and walk out. But I'm like, if you take, we talked about setting a timer for 15 minutes, take
Yeah.
in one drawer, take in one closet, take a half a closet, take a shelf, that nothing has to be done all at once. It is the movement and the small steps that get you the furthest than spending hours in one room and becoming so overwhelmed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just too drastic. And sometimes, you know, I do think with decluttering, it's a good time to be selfish. So it's you thinking about like you personally, what's a category of items that like is important to you, be it, I was just talking to someone and she was like, I just love to run. And she's like, I have like 10 pairs of running shoes and all of my gear. And it's like, you should have those things that bring you joy or enhance your life or you feel like align with your values. But like, do you have a strategic sort of like running corner of your closet where everything is nice and organized and neat so that when you need your things, you're able to grab it? And, when you think about running stuff, like just only her uses it. She's the only one that uses
Mhm.
it. So you don't have to negotiate with anyone. And I feel like that's also a good, you know, it's nice sometimes to declutter and even going back to my like 30-day capsule wardrobe. Like I did it based on what I wanted to wear. I didn't ask my wife. I didn't ask my children. It was funny because, I'm teaching and there were a couple days that I should have like better coordinated outfits because I almost wore the exact same thing like on a Monday and then on again on a Tuesday. And this kid was like, "Do you only wear green and brown?" And I was like, "Well, for this month, I sort of do." But like, I was able to choose those 30 items. I didn't have to negotiate with anyone. And sometimes that can feel nice when you're decluttering, when you know, like, what am I singularly in control of? And I can make the decisions on what do I want to keep versus what do I want to move out.
So I like to ask the big question, and that is, you have a huge following on your Instagram account, Tidy Dad. You
Mhm.
have been on multiple TV shows to talk about how you organize, how you take care of things. I want to ask the question, how did you become Tidy Dad?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Um, and, it's funny because it was partly motivated by all of our friends were like moving out of our New York City neighborhood. That in New York City, oftentimes, once you have small kids and they turn like 2 or 3, everybody starts to move to the suburbs. And so we had started to lose a lot of friends to the suburbs. And then also Marie Kondo's show came out on Netflix, which was
Hmm.
called Tidying Up with Marie Kondo. And everyone was all abuzz about it. And people were asking us questions of like, is this actually realistic? All the mom Facebook groups that my wife was in, moms were like, this sounds like it should be good, but I just don't know if it's realistic with kids. So, as Tidy Dad, I thought that I was going to start by being an in-home organizer. So, I set up these like free consultations and I would go into these apartments and I enjoyed so much talking about spaces. Like, I was so good at talking people through ideas that they did not need to hire me. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this. Plus, I was still teaching at the time, and I was like, I am not going to spend my Saturdays and Sundays doing this. That was the first pivot. Then the second pivot, I was like, I could teach in-person workshops. I'll invite parents to come with their kids, and I'll teach the parents and kids some of these philosophies. And then I can get my friends to come, and then they'll see that they can like edit and organize, and then they won't move away from us. And so I like rented space, but I had like two families show up. But then I went home and I was like, nobody wanted to come. But then I realized that on Instagram, like 15 people had liked my post. And I was like, oh, maybe I could post tips online. Then people don't have to leave their houses, and that might actually help them even more. So that's how Tidy Dad started. I mean, it's always sort of been this foundation of me being a teacher. I've always loved to teach. I've always loved to sort of figure out how can I present information? How can I make it sort of digestible and realistic and achievable? But, it's been 6 years since my first closet post. And so I've come a long way since then, but yet the foundation of this is still like, can you name what is just enough to you? Can you make space for what matters, as opposed to feeling like you're forced to make certain decisions? And it's also worth noting,
Hmm.
like, our friends who have moved to the suburbs, we're still friends with them. I don't think that everyone has to live in New York City. I think that square footage can be wonderful for families. But also, it's like our family has made it work. Like our living arrangement works in this small apartment for this season of life, and that's okay.
You guys have
Amazing.
like a ball in New York City. Like,
Yeah,
you're like um your weekends, and I know you have your cottage in Pennsylvania, but
yeah,
like your weekends and that's what I like because you also show people what is available in New York City for free.
yeah.
Like it's not all about because it can be overwhelming with three children and trying even like going to the movies and to doing these other things. I don't know if the girls realized it. I did. Your Thanksgiving dream came true. Do you want to tell?
Did. Yes. So for years, I've been manifesting this goal of being a Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade balloon handler. And I got to balloon handle this year. So it's funny
He
because
did.
as Tidy Dad in New York City circles, we start to get invited to certain things. So there'll be like press or people that, will sort of say, hey, there's this event going on, you want to come? And so a longtime follower of mine, she's actually one of the communications directors at Macy's. And so she invited us to this Santa Land event last November. And so I
Right.
met her there, and then I was like, this was a wonderful invite. Thank you. But I was like, just so you know, I have always wanted to be a Macy's balloon handler, and I will be the best balloon handler that Macy's has ever seen. I will smile the entire time. I'm willing to do it in rain or shine. And so then, fast forward, like 9 months later, she sponsored me because that's how you get, to be a handler or in the parade. You have to either work for Macy's or have someone sponsor you. And it was one of those moments where you always wonder, like, will it live up to the expectations?
Mhm.
And it's so cool in life when something just completely surpasses whatever you could have imagined. And the organizing side of me, I tell you, that operation, it is one of the most amazing operations I've ever seen. I had to I had to leave my apartment at 3:45 in the morning so that I could be on 34th Street by like 4:15. But I walked into the ballroom and they had all of these beautiful, meticulous rows of all of the costumes because every balloon handler, it's a different costume. And they had two costumers per costume rack, and you had to line up based on alphabetical order. They had checklists. I mean, it was it was amazing. And then I was the very first balloon handler to my balloon spot, and so I was able to snag the like front spot. So it was amazing. And I feel like that is just like that's what the goal of decluttering for me is. It is how do you make space for the things that are really important
Mm.
or matter to you? And I think that so often, it can sound so silly unless you've tried it, where people are like, does decluttering your stuff really lead to all of these other things happening? But to me, it's really been about honing my decision-making ability. That it's like,
Hmm.
if I'm able to make decisions and concretely name the type of dress shirts that I like to wear, I can then concretely name other things in my life that I like or I enjoy or I don't want to do. And even with this, to be a balloon handler, I had to go to practice at MetLife Stadium and I had to practice marching that balloon around, which meant that like my wife was with my daughters. It's where there's so many then dominoes that have to happen in order for that dream to like be manifested. But um, that was always my New York City bucket list dream. And then um the other has always been to be on the Today Show. And I booked the Today Show that I'm going on next week, next Wednesday. That was my other huge dream that with writing my book, Tidy Up Your Life, it's funny because people are like, what are you hoping for in terms of success? What are you hoping for in terms of book numbers? And I'm like, I really just want to go to the Today Show. Like we went to the Today Show. I have a picture with my wife and I and Hoda Kotb, who she's about to leave the
Hmm.
Today Show, but it was the day after we found our apartment in New York City. We had flown up from Kentucky. We found our apartment. We still had a couple days in New York, and we were like, what are we going to do? My wife before that, she had only been to New York City one other time. And so I was like, let's go to the Today Show. So we went to the Today Show and she got to ask Hoda and at the time Kathy Lee a question. And we asked them a question about where should we go shopping for new things for our apartment. And then we got a photo with Hoda afterwards. But it's cool sometimes to think about just the circle of things and
Mm.
how, you know, when you're able to put those small steps into place, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes some cool things can happen. And I'm learning that it's not always on the timeline that we expect. And that's true with decluttering too, that it's like you don't just overhaul things in a night. Like when I think about my own tidy dad journey and some of the mental health struggles that I've had, the decision to step down from school admin, return to teaching. Even this year, I'm at a new school that's only 6 blocks from our apartment because I wanted to be at the same school as all three of my daughters. Like, those are huge decisions, but I was able to make them because I, you know, I was able to hone my decision making skills. I was able to set boundaries and name what was important. And as silly as it sounds, that like started with my tiny closet and seeing, can I make this closet work? So again, that's a long-winded answer for yes, I was a Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade balloon handler.
I know, but I didn't think the girls realized it, and I wanted to make sure you brought it up
Mm.
because it was so fun to watch your journey through that. And the unfortunate thing is it poured the whole day,
It
the whole
did.
time. It
It did.
poured, it poured.
It did. And my poor wife, that I'm like, she had the toughest job, which was wrangling my three children in the pouring down rain. But everyone, all of the volunteers were just so happy because rain or shine, we all had a job to do.
Right.
And it was cool because there were people yelling for me as Tidy Dad all along the
Oh,
way that there were, so that like that was one of those. you know, just amazing moments of like, we came to New York City years ago. My dream was just to move to the city. I had no expectations for our life here. I wanted to get my master's degree at Columbia. I did it. And then everybody started asking us the hypothetical questions of, when are you going to move back? Can you really have all of those children in New York City? What are you going to do when they get older with that one bathroom? And, I'm like, I don't know, but we really like living here, and we're going to see if we can continue to make it work.
You brought up your
That's amazing.
you brought up your book. Can you tell us some more about it?
Yeah. So here it is. It's called Tidy Up Your Life. Um, so what was really important with this book was being able to dive into the two parts of tidying, which to me is tidying up your mind and also tidying up your physical space. So the first half of the book really dives into how do you sit with your mess, be it physical or mental? How do you establish what is just enough? How do you think of the rhythms of your life and develop routines? And then the second half of the book are those practical tips for tidying and organizing and cleaning. And we work room by room, and think about what are some of the systems that you can set up. So it is cool to think about this more holistic look at tidy up your life, because so often people are like, are you just a dad who's like obsessed with order and with cleaning and with tidying? And it's like, I do enjoy it, but I also have seen just some of the joys that have come from this journey that I've been on to tidy up my life.
I love that it's a lifestyle. I just love that. That it's a way of living.
Yeah, because it's deprogramming ourselves, because like the decluttering sort of steps that I talk about in the book is this idea of you clear the space, then you sort the stuff, then you assess what do you keep, what do you move out, and then you make a plan for what to do with the stuff. And so often we are programmed to just jump to the plan. Like if I can just figure out what to do, if I can get all these organizers, if I can make this decision, if I can fill out my planner, like everything's going to fall into place. But so often what's missing is that process of clearing, of just like bringing out all of the stuff that you're thinking about. Similar to like with my closet, when you unload all of the stuff, you're then able to step back, sort of sit with that mess, and then sort the stuff, do the assessment, and then make the plan. So that's what's really important with the book is like we have to stop jumping steps and realize that it's okay to sit with the mess and make sense of it before moving on.
What does that look like? I mean, as an example, I have a closet that is an absolute disaster. It started off as being a wrapping closet, somewhere to keep all my rolls of paper and bags and bows and all the nonsense. And it is now overloaded with all of this other stuff just because there was space in the closet to put it. How do I do that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I do think that with that, I think the good thing is that you've sort of identified the problem while also thinking about the purpose behind what the closet was in the first place. But I do think that with clearing and then sorting, like until you actually have fully cleared everything out, you don't really understand what it is that you're working with. And that's when I think that process of sorting is helpful. And I think with an overhaul closet like that, there's going to have to be some sort of pending categories, because what I would imagine is that you're going to discover some hidden treasures, and there may be other categories of like treasures somewhere else in your house. And so it really is important to really look at categories of things together. So it's like if it is all of the gift wrapping stuff, it's making sure that you have that in one section. But if you're finding like old clothes or towels or whatever it may be, you do have to start to bring those categories of things together, or else how are you going to know what actually to keep or what to move out? And I
Yeah.
know that you can sort of start this domino, but it's when you sort of walk through the process in one space, you learn something about yourself that you're then able to move on to other areas as well.
Yeah. I mean, that from a practical standpoint, that sounds obviously the perfect solution. Um, when you were saying that, there was this whole feeling of overwhelm that started to come up for me to go, oh my God, that's
And I
so
think
much work.
yeah, and I think that that's when you have to keep in mind that you're just starting with that one closet.
Mm.
And it's sort of then thinking about those excess items. Are you going to have a staging ground, of where things are going, while you're sorting? I remember that when we were in our apartment and in that little tiny closet, I realized that we had been storing like extra pillows and blankets and
Yeah.
random like baby supplies. Like what feels overwhelming is when you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know where any of this stuff goes. And
Yes.
one strategy that is interesting is when you think about like a blueprint of your home, and we have one for our apartment where it's, what architects do is they give you the layout of what the large rooms are. You know what your living room is, you know where your kitchen is, you know where the garage is, whatever. But we all have those closet spaces that we don't actually define a purpose for. And it would be interesting for you to think about, okay, could you draw a blueprint of all of the closet spaces that you have in your home? And then could you open up the closet door and name for yourself, okay, what is the purpose of this particular closet? And I'm wondering if you could sort of make that blueprint for yourself. Would it sort of help with some of those puzzles as you're clearing out the stuff that you're like, okay, I just discovered, this extra vacuum cleaner inside this wrapping paper closet. I know that I have this other closet in the house that these are my cleaning supplies. So I'm literally taking that vacuum cleaner and I'm going and putting it by that cleaning closet because that's where it should go theoretically.
Mhm.
So that could be an exercise to try because so often we don't think about allocating organizational real estate in our home. We're just like,
Yeah.
yes, that's a bedroom, there's the bathroom, but we don't think about the other sort of like little rooms, which are what closets are, and think about their actual purpose.
Yeah. I like the whole real estate aspect of that.
Yeah,
That's
and also
it's important.
because if you're not clear on it, how is anyone that you live with clear on it? And that's
Yes.
everybody is just shuffling stuff back and forth.
Yeah.
It's
Just
like if
trying to
one
find
person,
space.
yes, it's like if one person thinks it's the cleaning closet and the other person says, oh, that's the catch-all closet, then you're like working against each other.
I think all my closets are catch-all closets.
Which could be. And that's when, like, one of the things that I felt like we were going to be so organized when everything was in the room where it was used. That was my experiment with myself was like, okay, can items be used stored in the room where they're actually used? Because we had not sort of intuitively organized things that way. And even when people move into a new house, oftentimes you just put stuff where things fit. And
Mhm.
like that doesn't actually help when it comes to knowing where things are or knowing where to put things back.
Mhm. Yeah, good point. Good point.
So after this, just go unload every closet in your house and and draw your blueprint. And then, I mean, it is sort of fun to see. Those are those
Yeah,
projects because, you know, it's one of those things that feels overwhelming, but if you're like, okay, if I give myself a couple hours, could it get a little bit better? And
Yeah.
oftentimes
Oh, the
it,
answer is definitely yes. I mean,
it
even just to
does.
even if it's just to uncover the hidden treasures that are sitting in there. Because
Yes.
you're right. Like, there's definitely, I mean, whenever I lose something, I'm like, oh, it's just gone to that special place. I don't know where that place is, but it exists somewhere in my house.
Yes. And then it's easier to just buy the item again than go to search for it. And that's what
Yeah.
people so often do is that they're like, I'm just going to go buy this for for the someday when the other thing shows up. So it just becomes this like cycle that you sort of have
yeah,
to break.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, what about the emotional attachment? How do you deal with that? Because
Yeah,
that's my big one.
I think that that's huge. And I think that you have to unearth the root of the emotional attachment because for so often, I mean, for some people, there is the feeling of, well, I've held on to it for 20 years. And there's that like almost regret of like, but I've held on to it for this long. And then the flip is the question of like, is this actually going to serve me in my future? Am I going to use it? Or is it getting in the way of me having space for something else that I would like to bring in? I mean, embarrassment, regret. I feel like those are huge feelings that it's silly it's silly sometimes when are like I pulled open that drawer and there's that weird like can opener that I've had forever or for us we have this salad shooter. It's like this big bulky thing that like in the 2000s I feel like there were all those infomercials where you could put all the pieces together, you could stick the carrots in, you plug it in and it like shreds it. As I say this, I know that we have a drawer in our kitchen where we still have that thing. And why do I still have it? Because I know that my childhood best friend's parents bought that for us when we got married. So we all sort of deal with those things, but I do feel like you have to uncover and you have to sit with the mess. And I feel like that's why so often people just want to go straight to the plan or they just want to abandon it and say, I'm not dealing with this right now. But there reaches a certain point where you have to deal with it. Either you're going to deal with it or somebody else is going to deal with
Yeah.
it. And so we've really had to ask ourselves, like, is this getting in the way of us having our ideal, like, organized cabinet with the drawer that pulls out? Is this salad shooter really the obstacle that's getting in the way of me doing that? So, as we say that, I now want to go pull open. But it's January, so I can
Yeah.
because we were talking about kitchen items. This is the month to do it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like so often nobody wants to confront hard feelings.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
No,
sometimes you just have to because you then learn something about yourself that you can then transfer to other areas of your life.
absolutely, absolutely. Is your book out now?
It comes out January 7th. January 7th is the publishing date. So
5 more days.
5 days. So it's funny because I'm in the like untidiest place ever, just because there's so much excitement going on, but also, it's a reminder to that we sort of just have to live in this season. Like this is something that we've been working towards for so long, and it is exciting to be able to talk about the book, but also, I don't know, it's nerve-wracking to see how people will receive it. But that is something that's really exciting too. There's a whole unknown that I have no idea what's about to unfold, but I'm okay with it.
How was the experience of writing the book?
It was
Like that's a big undertaking.
Yeah.
it was a huge undertaking. When you talk about, taking an overwhelming task and dividing it into manageable parts. And I know that this sounds cliche because I have a weekday cleaning routine, but I do feel like my weekday cleaning routine taught me how to take a job like the book and organize it into manageable parts. And like for example, my huge thing was like once I had the sort of table of contents outlined. Like this is my writer's notebook that I just keep beside my bed. And I outlined every single chapter of the book. And I used my old like post-it strategies. And I carried this with me for a solid month. When I would get ideas, I was like, okay, what chapter does this go into? Once I had this like blueprint, I was then able to through like voice memo and then sort of old school drafting begin to piece together sort of parts of the book. And that book writing process, it does give us parallels to life because we all have those huge, overwhelming projects that you have to break into smaller, manageable parts. You have to set a goal for yourself. Like for me, what was very motivating, and I know that it may sound silly or overwhelming to people, but as a teacher, I used my teacher breaks as the goalpost for when I had to meet certain deadlines. So like Thanksgiving break, I set a deadline for my editor. Right before Christmas break, I did the same thing. Before our February break and then spring break, because I'm used to, as a teacher, pushing really hard up until the break. And then once I get a break, I like switch. I'm like, I cannot think about anything complex. So even using that and setting those goalposts is really helpful. And it makes me think, about the closet example that we were talking about before. Like sometimes even with decluttering, it can be really helpful to set for yourself the like must be out by date, where you're like, next Friday is the day that anything that does not have a home, it is being taken to the donation center. That is the line in the sand that I'm drawing. And for some people, that can be motivating. I will say, if you use that strategy, just make sure it's your stuff and not someone else's stuff. Because if you use that strategy for other people's stuff, they might not be very happy and you might derail the whole process.
Good point. It's always easier to
Um,
clean up somebody else's stuff,
yes,
though.
For
it is.
sure, because you're
It
like, get
always
rid of
is.
it all. Get rid of it
Yeah.
all.
What are you keeping this for? You don't need this.
Correct. Correct. Yes. So that's why you start with your stuff. Then if the other person is inspired or motivated, you like bring them along on the journey too, but you don't start with the sentimental stuff. You start with much lower stakes items and then
Right.
gradually build up from there.
Yeah. Which is why the closet for me will be good because it is, unless there's some really good hidden treasures in there, it is lower stakes for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And then you see what you learn, you see if you're motivated, and then you keep going.
Mm. Mm. Awesome.
Um, we were talking about Tracy G. asked you, how you wrote the book. You have been very open, like you don't know what the future is going to hold with the book. And I think that leads pretty cool into your motto. So I just follow you too much, Tyler. I think it's I'll see. Is that it?
Yeah, well, I can't see. Yeah,
I
we had
can't see. Yeah.
yeah, we had this moment of sledding over the break,
Oh,
and
yes, that was it.
the girls were all piled on top of me on the sled. And as you know, when you do it with kids, first you're like, nobody get hurt. And second, it was like, you can't pull on me. But for some reason, they kept like holding on to me by my eyes. And so there was just this moment that my wife captured where we're just sledding down the hill and I'm screaming, I can't see, I can't see, I can't see. And then we all get to the bottom and sort of fall off and we just laugh. And when I watched that video back, I was like, oh my goodness, that is 2025 to me because we've all had those moments in time where you tangibly know that life is going to change the next day. So, like when you think about the birth of children, when you're getting married, even, when you think about like the death of a loved one, you can remember those moments in time where something changes forever. And for me, you know, it's serendipitous that my first ever Instagram post was January 6th of 2019. And it's fascinating that this book is being published January 7th of 2025, which means that like overnight, everything that I know it is about to change, regardless of how this book lands in the world. I will forever be able to say that I published a book. That's a huge accomplishment. And come January 7th, life does change for me, but I can't see what is ahead. And I think that that's an okay orientation because, you know, I never would have thought that like me showing videos of myself scrubbing my toilet would lead to someone, saying, "Hey, do you want to write a book about yourself?" Or, "Do you want to write a book?" Just like when we moved here, you know, over 10 years ago, 13 years ago, and we took that picture with Hoda Kotb outside of the Today Show studio. Really? That someone would have said, "Oh, 14 years later, you're going to have written a book called Tidy Up Your Life, which unpacks the mental health breakdown that you're going to go on, once you have children and also decide to take a promotion at work. But it's going to be okay because you tidy things up and then you're going to teach other people how, like, you can't make that, there's no way that you could imagine that. And so, you know, it doesn't mean that I'm not setting goals for myself, but right now, even just with my own personal anxiety, it's like, it does me no good to try to jump ahead to what's to come because I don't know.
No, and that's perfect. And I think um, the last question that I have for you is where can we get the book?
Yeah, so Tidy Up Your Life is available wherever books are sold. There's also an audiobook version. So,
And
Tracy,
you speak
but
it, don't you?
I do. I got to record that. I did. I asked my publisher first if Morgan Freeman was available, and they said no. And then I asked for Viola Davis, and they said no. And then I said, okay, I'll do it. I'm just kidding. But Tracy, you could listen to the audiobook while you're unloading all of those closets, which I think is cool. I think that the audiobook, it's nice to hear it spoken in, the author's voice, but it's also
Totally agree.
there's an ebook version, there's also the hardcover version.
Okay.
But if you have a local bookstore, it's great to support them.
Hmm.
Um, but it's wherever books are sold, and I'm really excited to see what this new year holds, but also for others. Like, I'm excited to see the journey that people go on to tidy up their life and, make space for what really is important.
Well, I really enjoyed, following you on your journey. Like this has been really
Yeah.
exciting for us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
thanks. Thanks. Yeah, and I feel like it's nice to come back, like we've been talking in different iterations throughout this book writing process, and it's like it takes years to write a book. It's a long time, but I am excited for this like next stage and to see what happens. I also have a nice trip planned. Trips are very motivational for me. So the middle of February, we're all going to Madrid in Spain because once again, it's always cheaper to fly from New York City to Europe than it is from New York to New York City to Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
In February. So, we're excited for like some family adventure time too, because that's what's important is like making space for what matters.
Mhm. Those memories are incredible.
Yeah.
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 Mhm. And
Well,
they take up no
Tyler,
space.
Yes.
no, they
Yes.
don't. Tyler, thank you so much for taking time to meet
Mhm.
with us. We greatly appreciate it. To our listeners, please, if you have any questions for Tyler, we will have all of his contact information in below, and please put any comments whatsoever. But again, Tyler, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you as a regular member of our community.